Since vampire blood was supposed to temporarily relieve symptoms of illness and increase sexual potency, kind of like prednisone and Viagra rolled into one, there was a huge black market for genuine, undiluted vampire blood. Where there's a market, there are suppliers, and in this case, I just learned the scummy rat couple. They'd formerly trapped vampires and drained them, selling the little vials of blood for as much as $200 apiece. It had been the drug of choice for at least 2 years now. Some buyers went crazy after drinking pure vampire blood, but that didn't slow the market any. The drained vampire didn't last long, as a rule. The drainers left the vampires staked or simply dumped them out in the open. When the sun came up, that was all she wrote. From time to time, you read about the tables being turned when the vampire managed to get free. Then you got your dead drainers. Now my vampire was getting up and leaving with the rats. Mac met my eyes, and I saw him looking distinctly startled at the expression on my face. He turned away, shrugging me off like everyone else. That made me mad. Really mad. What should I do? While I struggled with myself, they were out the door. Would the vampire believe me if I ran after them? Told him? No one else did. Or if by chance they did, they hated and feared me for reading the thoughts concealed in people's brains. Arlene had begged me to read her fourth husband's mind when he'd come in to pick her up one night, because she was pretty certain he was thinking of leaving her and the kids, but I wouldn't, because I wanted to keep the one friend I had. And even Arlene hadn't been able to ask me directly, because that would be admitting I had this gift, this curse. People couldn't admit it. They had to think I was crazy, which sometimes I almost was. So I dithered, confused and frightened and angry, and then I knew I just had to act. I was goaded by the look Mac had given me, as if I was negligible. I slid down the bar to Jason, where he was sweeping Deanne off her feet. She didn't take much sweeping, popular opinion had it. The trucker from Hammond was glowering from her from the other side. "Jason," I said urgently. He turned to give me a warning glare. "Listen, is that chain still in the back of your pickup?" "Never leave home without it," he said lazily, his eyes scanning my face for signs of trouble. "You gonna fight, Suki?" I smiled at him, so used to grinning that it was easy. "I sure hope not," I said cheerfully. "Hey, you need help?" After all, he was my brother. "No thanks," I said, trying to sound reassuring, and I slipped over to Arlene. "Listen, I've got to leave a little early. My tables are pretty thin. Can you cover for me?" I didn't think I'd ever asked Arlene for such a thing, though I'd covered for her many times. She, too, offered me help. "That's okay," I said. "I'll be back in if I can. If you clean my area, I'll do your trailer." Arlene nodded her red mane enthusiastically. I pointed to the employee door, to myself, and made my fingers walk to tell Sam where I was going. He nodded. He didn't look happy. So out the back door I went, trying to make my feet quiet on the gravel. The employee parking lot is at the rear of the bar, through a door leading to the storeroom. The cook's car was there, and Arlene's, Dawn's, and mine. To my right, the east, Sam's pickup was sitting in front of his trailer. I went out of the graveled employee parking area into the blacktop that surfaced the much larger customer lot to the west of the bar. Woods surrounded the clearing in which Merlot stood, and the edges of the parking lot were mostly gravel. Sam kept it well lit, and the surrealistic glare of the high parking lot lights made everything look strange. I saw the rat couple's dented red sports car, so I knew they were close. I found Jason's truck at last. It was black with custom aqua and pink swirls on the sides. He sure did love to be noticed. I pulled myself up by the tailgate and rummaged around the bed for his chain, a thick length of links that he carried in case of a fight. I looped it and carried it pressed close to my body so it wouldn't chink. I thought a second. The only halfway private spot to which the rat race could have lured the vampire was the end of the parking lot, where the trees actually overhung the cars. So I crept in that direction, trying to move fast and low. I paused every few seconds and listened. Soon I heard a groan and the faint sounds of voices. I snaked between the cars, and I spotted them right where I figured they'd be. The vampire was down on the ground on his back, his face contorted in agony, and the gleam of chains crisscrossed his wrists and ran down to his ankles. Silver. There were 2 little vials of blood already on the ground beside Denise's feet, and as I watched, she fixed a new vacutainer to the needle. The tourniquet above his elbow dug cruelly into his arm. Their backs were to me, and the vampire hadn't seen me yet. I loosened the coiled chain so a good 3 feet of it swung free. Who to attack first? They were both small and vicious. I remembered Mac's contemptuous dismissal and the fact that he never left me a tip. Mac first. I've never actually been in a fight before. Somehow, I was positively looking forward to it. I leapt out from behind a pickup and swung the chain. It whacked across Mac's back as he knelt beside the victim. He screamed and jumped up. After a glance, Denise set about getting the third vacutainer plugged. Mac's hand dipped down to his boot and he came up shining. I gulped. He had a knife in his hand. "Uh-oh," I said and grinned at him. "You crazy bitch," he screamed. He sounded like he was looking forward to using the knife. I was too involved to keep my mental guard up, and I had a clear flash of what Mac wanted to do to me. It drove me really crazy. I went for him with every intention of hurting him as badly as I could, but he was ready for me and jumped forward with the knife while I was swinging the chain. He sliced at my arm and just missed it. The chain, on its recoil, wrapped around his skinny neck like a lever. Mac's yell of triumph turned into a gurgle. He dropped the knife and clawed at the links with both hands. Losing air, he dropped to his knees on the rough pavement, yanking the chain from my hand. Well, there went Jason's chain. I swooped down and scooped up Mac's knife, holding it like I knew how to use it. Denise had been lunging forward, looking like a redneck witch in the lines and shadows of the security lights. She stopped in her tracks when she saw I had Mac's knife. She cursed and railed and said terrible things. I waited till she'd run down to say, "Get out now." Denise stared holes of hate in my head. She tried to scoop up the vials of blood, but I hissed at her to leave them alone. So she pulled Mac to his feet. He was still making choking, gurgling sounds and holding the chain. Denise kind of dragged him along to their car and shoved him in through the passenger side. Yanking some keys from her pocket, Denise threw herself in the driver's seat. As I heard the engine roar into life, suddenly I realized that the rats now had another weapon. Faster than I ever moved, I ran to the vampire's head and panted, "Push with your feet!" I grabbed him under the arms and yanked back with all my might, and he caught on and braced his feet and shoved. We were just inside the tree line when the red car came roaring down at us. Denise missed us by less than a yard when she had to swerve to avoid hitting a pine. Then I heard the big motor of the rat's car receding in the distance. "Oh, wow," I breathed, and knelt by the vampire because my knees wouldn't hold me up anymore. I breathed heavily for just a minute, trying to get a hold of myself. The vampire moved a little, and I looked over. To my horror, I saw wisps of smoke coming up from his wrists where the silver touched them. "Oh, you poor thing," I said, angry at myself for not caring for him instantly. Still trying to catch my breath, I began to unwind the thin bands of silver, which all seemed to be part of one very long chain. "Poor baby," I whispered, never thinking until later how incongruous that sounded. I have agile fingers, and I released his wrists pretty quickly. I wondered how the rats had distracted him while they got into position to put them on, and I could feel myself reddening as I pictured it. The vampire cradled his arms to his chest while I worked on the silver wrapped around his legs. His ankles had fared better since the drainers hadn't troubled to pull up his jean legs and put the silver against his bare skin. "I'm sorry I didn't get here faster," I said apologetically. "You'll feel better in a minute, right? Do you want me to leave?" "No." That made me feel pretty good until he added, "They might come back, and I can't fight yet." His cool voice was uneven, but I couldn't exactly say I'd heard him panting. I made a sour face at him, and while he was recovering, I took a few precautions. I sat with my back to him, giving him some privacy. I know how unpleasant it is to be stared at when you're hurting. I hunkered down on the pavement, keeping watch on the parking lot. Several cars left, and others came in, but none came down to our end by the woods. By the movement of the air around me, I knew when the vampire had sat up. He didn't speak right away. I turned my head to the left to look at him. He was closer than I thought. His big dark eyes looked into mine. His fangs had retracted. I was a little disappointed about that. "Thank you," he said stiffly. So he wasn't thrilled about being rescued by a woman. Typical guy. Since he was being so ungracious, I felt I could do something rude too, and I listened to him, opening my mind completely, and I heard nothing. That's it for tonight.